What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Talkin' Ish podcast. This is Chris Heller. How's it going today? Great to have you here with me. Some background noise in the office studio today, possibly. There's like a little event going on a couple doors down, so bear with me. But nonetheless, we persevere. So it's like 97 degrees outside in Brooklyn today and yesterday. Last week it was like 30. But it's fine. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. It's insane, but this is not a show about the weather. I thought I would just get on the mic here today and say some random thoughts, a podpourri, if you will. It's been a little while since I've been on the mic on the Talkin' Ish podcast. For the last, month, 6 weeks, I've been banging out a bunch of Past the 40s episodes, which is another podcast I host where I have on guests. I interview people that are 40 years old, have just turned 40 or turning 40 soon, and ask them 40 questions about life and goals and experiences and their past and their families and whatever it may be. And that's kind of been taking up my podcast content output for the last 6 weeks or so. And interestingly enough, if you haven't been following that, what are you doing, first of all? Get on it. And what I've been doing this year, as it differs from last year in 2017 when I started this podcast. In 2017, it was obviously people that, it was the low-hanging fruit. It was people I was friends with, people that, I turned 40 last year, so I had other people that I knew a lot of people turning 40. So those were, that was the batch of interviewees that made up the episodes. So this year, what I'd done is started reaching out to people that I don't know via Instagram using the hashtag #ThisIs40. So people that I follow the hashtag #ThisIs40 on Instagram, and not every time, but very often when I see someone use that hashtag in a story or in a post, I have this, message. I direct message them explaining that I host this podcast called Past the 40, and this year I'm trying to, expand the network of guests. I would love to have you as a guest, and that has led to a number of, at least, communications, and so far 5 or 6 episodes actually, where it's me interviewing complete strangers, which has been an awesome experience because it's allowed me to, meet some new interesting people and talk to them and communicate with them rather than just my, inner network here in New York. And just to get a different perspective, and, who knows? Maybe I just stay in touch with some of these people and I have a new lifelong friend. But I think there are more of these to come. I know I have a couple lined up, and there have been people who have showed a lot of interest who just haven't, materialized yet, just finding the right time and day to make the recording happen. But long story short, I've been putting podcast time into that rather than here in the recent past. And if you're listening and you're 40 or know someone who's 40 or around that age, I'm not too strict. I'm 41 and I still haven't been a guest, but that's soon to come as well. If you are, get at me. Let's make it happen. Get on the Past the 40 podcast and let me interview you. Or if you know someone who you think would be a great guest, let's do it. So I'm on round 2 of the fasting mimicking diet from my friends over at Prolon, which is pro longevity. The pro stands for something too, professional something longevity. It's if you listened, I did a video post about this last month. I did it one time. This is my second time. Essentially, what happens is they send you a box. Within that box is 4 smaller boxes. For those of you watching on video, I'll hold it up. You see number 4, as this is my 4th day of 5 on the fasting mimicking diet. Sipping some tea right now. You're allowed to have as much tea and water as you'd like, but otherwise what comes in the box is all you can eat in that given day. And what it does is it tricks your body into believing that it's fasting, so you get all the benefits of fasting, but allows you to consume 700-800 calories a day. I think on Monday, day 1, it's like 1,100 calories, a little bit more. So what are the benefits of fasting? Now, I'm certainly not a scientist by any means, nor do I play one on the podcast. But, I read and heard many things over the last couple of years about intermittent fasting and just fasting quarterly and fasting as a huge benefit to your body for longevity, for fighting disease and whatnot. There was some article I read and quoted in the video I when I reviewed this the first time through, that basically said that doing fasting on a regular basis, fights off. Obviously, it's not a cure by any means, but it helps against Alzheimer's, cancer, heart disease, everything that kills us as humans, essentially. Fasting has benefits towards, and the guy who's behind this fasting mimicking diet is Walter Luongo, who has studied centenarians around the world and what they eat, and has been doing this for 25 years, a leader in the space, leader in the field and whatnot. So I buy it, and the first time through, I know 5 days sounds daunting, but it wasn't that bad. I'm on day 4 right now, and you can tell my energy is still up, and had some olives and a tomato soup for lunch. I freaking despise olives, and I don't really like tomatoes, but here I am still killing it. But as far as the science piece of it goes, obviously I know there are benefits. I don't try to dive in, but I did hear Dr. Peter Attia on the Joe Rogan podcast last week. And I've heard Peter Attia on, Tim Ferriss a number of times. He's in his books. He's a force of nature. He's a doctor. He's swam, he's just accomplished incredible things, and most of them have to do with his body. And he's a doctor. So a way that he was speaking about fasting. He is a daily faster. He basically has one meal per day on most days, fasts for 22 hours a day, and eats 3,000 calories in one sitting, essentially. That's his day-to-day diet. I'm not recommending that by any means, and nor do I think I can ever get to that point, but that's the type of guy we're dealing with here. And just to try to simplify it, or rather, something he said stuck out to me in a way to simplify it, because people ask me, why do you do it? What are the benefits? I'm like, I don't really know the science of it, but so what he said was essentially, we have millions, billions of cells in our body doing shit, right? Working for us, making things hum. And a lot of those cells are shitty, lazy, bums. You know the type. They just don't get shit done. They're not that motivated, and they don't really perform at optimal levels. So when you're fasting, you are depriving the body of nutrients that you get from food, right? So what that does is causes the cells to optimize, to step up their game, essentially. So what happens, those shitty cells either, they basically have two choices. Either get your shit together and start pulling your weight and performing, or get eaten, literally, by one of the good cells who's trying to, fill the gaps from the lack of nutrients. So that's what I've learned, which I think is a simplistic way of looking at it, and I think it makes a lot of sense in a simple way. But long story short, the Fasting Mimicking Diet by Prolong, I highly recommend it. The way they recommend it is, the reason I'm doing it back-to-back months right now is they think to get started, you should do it 3 months in a row, and then once per quarter after that, and that will have, lasting benefits. Who knows, but I've read enough and heard enough to fully buy in. And I really like food, man, and to not have my choice of food for 5 days at a clip is not something I'm excited about. However, mind over matter, head down, and just kind of bang that shit out and make it happen. So check them out. I think it's prolonfmd.com. Excuse me while I take another sip of tea, but, with only eating 700 calories, I'm really all over the tea and the water. You're allowed to have as much of those as possible. So check that out. Moving on to another topic, just a book that I just finished, All the Pieces Matter. It's the inside story of The Wire, told in an oral history format. If you're not familiar with oral history for any reason, it's essentially Jonathan Abrams He's the author. He interviewed everyone from the cast of The Wire, cast and crew, and put together a book with the cast and crew speaking their parts. That's an oral history. I assume you guys know what that format looks like. So he got everyone involved. Obviously, David Simon had to sign off on it, and he was the prevailing voice. Ed Burns, Idris Elba, Dominic West, Andre Royo, Sonia San, Michael K. Williams, Michael B. Jordan, and I'm missing the names right now, but Bodie, Bunny Colvin, Lester Freeman, every single person that you could think of, all the Sabatkas, had their say throughout this book. And I'm a huge fan of The Wire. If you know me, you know that. I think it's the greatest TV show by 10 miles that's ever been made, and arguably the greatest piece of art that's ever been made. And it's just something that I can watch over and over again and just get better and better. And I didn't think I could appreciate it any more than I do, but this book made me appreciate it even more, because you really learn about what was going on behind the scenes and how close they were to being canceled, and just these little nuggets. Like Idris Elba, if he didn't get the part, the next day he was going back to London to get back to his life. He had a daughter and whatnot. So many things just so close to not happening throughout this epic piece of 60, I think, episodes through 5 seasons that happened. I'll read a passage to you that really stood out to me as a fan of The Wire, as really pointing out David Simon is fucking brilliant. All you have to do is follow him on Twitter for a day, and he's just an incredible thinker. Obviously, he put together this show. I've heard him speak. I went to actually sometime in the last 5 years to the Pauley Center uptown in the city. There was a Wire reunion, and there were 20 of the cast on stage together, with David Simon being interviewed by Alan Sepinwall, I think it was, the TV guy, prominent TV dude, which was an incredible thing. But David Simon is brilliant. And while, The Wire did not get critical acclaim while it was on, the ratings were shitty from day one. They picked up a little seasons 4 and 5, but, nothing close to some of the other HBO hits like Sopranos, Sex and the City, or anything like that. And that's why they essentially thought they were canceled after they weren't sure if they were coming back after season 1. They certainly thought they weren't coming back after season 3, and then again after season 4. A lot of people were like, oh, they should just go out on top, because there were rumblings about how incredible this show was, but just the masses had not caught on yet. So Andre Royo, Bubbles' character. This is him speaking in the book, and this just really epitomizes a lot of the feelings that I and other Wire fans have about it. So this is Bubbles speaking, or Andre Royo rather. I remember going to David Simon and talking to him. I was that kind of guy. I liked people. I would always go to the writer's room wondering about how these white boys is telling these stories with an all-black cast. David Simon was the dude. I'm like, David, we never got nominated. Boston Legal got nominated. What we got to do, David? He's like, I'm not doing nothing. They're not going to catch on until we're gone. This is the type of show that they're going to pick up when we're off the show, like a book, and rewatch it over and over again. I remember my first response in my head was, what an arrogant white boy. What the fuck is he talking about? He was right. He really understood that the audience was starting to change, and the audience was starting to appreciate not being treated like they're stupid. Nothing has to be spelled out. They can stick with a story even though it's slow. They can stick with a story even though there's 40 characters. They appreciate being treated like they're intelligent. All of a sudden, The Wire became that show where there was a hierarchy. If you say you like The Wire, that means you like reading books. That means you give a fuck about the human race. It made you feel like you bettered yourself in the crowd when you say, my favorite show is The Wire. And my favorite show is The Wire. And I do feel better when I say that. And when someone else gives you the nod, of course. And now it's not cool to say anymore because everyone says it, but it's still good enough to supersede the not being cool factor. So when I come across people, and I have some very close to me that have never seen it, I just can't comprehend the crap that they do watch on television, that they haven't put the time in to go watch this brilliant piece of art. And even people who've seen it once and know it's so good, how they haven't gone back to it. Because like David Simon says in that passage, it is like an amazing novel that you can really just read again and again and again and watch again and again and again and just always pick up new stuff. I always tell people this. I enjoyed the second time of The Wire better than the first. And it's the only show that I continually go back to, and I'm still like, this is so good. This is so, so good. And I do it every time. I've actually, since reading this book, I went back and started season 4 again. And, I've been watching, and now it's interesting because I know these like super like tiny little nuggets told from the cast as I'm watching. For example, last night I was watching with my wife, season 4, episode 5 or 6, Clay Davis does his famous, sheet. And I say to her, 9 E's. And she's like, what are you talking about? Isaiah Whitlock Jr., the actor who plays Clay Davis, in the book says, when he says sheet, it's got 9 E's. That's the way to say it. That's the way to write it. Any other way is wrong. Or that the actor who played Prop Joe was like an actor's actor, an acting teacher, and he, in season 4, took the kids under his wing and really coached them through acting. Things like that are just incredible now that you have this background. So if you haven't seen The Wire, stop listening, or after you're done listening to this podcast, go turn it on. You know where to find it: HBO Go, on demand, on Files, whatever. You can find it. We're all resourceful here. And if you've seen it and know it's great, watch it again. Trust me. Speaking of books, so I put that one down and picked up another one called Now and Then. And what Now and Then is the autobiography of one Joseph Heller, the author of and phrase coiner of Catch-22, also happens to be my great uncle on my dad's side. So I thought, I can't believe I've never read this. I thought it would give an interesting insight into some of the Heller family, and just insight into Uncle Joe, who, I didn't have that much interaction with as a kid growing up when he was alive. But obviously an interesting character. If you know anything about his writing, his books, and stories I've heard, he's somebody that, I'd like to get to know posthumously in this form. So I picked up Now and Then and started reading. And yesterday I read just the first chapter, and, just already amazed and just enthralled and just can't wait for what's going to happen here, or what I can learn here. So the first chapter is strictly about, he grew up on Coney Island, obviously in Brooklyn, where I live right now, so not that far from here. And it was about his household of 4 that he grew up with, which was his mom and his brother and sister, who I learned in the book is actually his half-brother and sister, my grandfather, Lee, my dad's dad, and his sister, Sylvia, to me, Aunt Sylvia, who I learned are actually half-siblings to Joe Heller in this book. So Lee and Sylvia were born in Russia, or Lee was born in Russia and then came over here when he was like 6 or 7, and then Sylvia was born here. Their mom died young, which I guess is technically my great-grandmother. And their dad, my great-grandfather, remarried, had Joseph Heller with his new wife, and then he died from complications of like a bleeding ulcer, which with today's medicine would have been probably detected and in and out in no time, nothing serious. So he died fairly young as well. And so the foursome that grew up together in Coney Island was my grandfather Lee, who I learned his name was actually Eli, but went by Lee, Sylvia, Uncle Joe, Joe's mom, and their stepmom. So they were raised by a stepmom, essentially orphans, really, in Brooklyn. So, hearing this and just learning this on like page 3, I'm like, wow, this is something interesting that is part of my history that I really know nothing about. So I'm very excited to keep reading. And then today, I get to chapter 2, and what do I learn today? But how do I put this one out there? But my wife, her family traces back to Nathan's hot dogs, which, as I'm sure you know, was started on Coney Island. So in the book today, Joe is speaking in first person. It's autobiography. If I didn't say that, I think I said auto. Speaking in first person, he's a big eater, and it's talking about hot dogs, and says that this gentleman Nathan started a hot dog stand, grilling instead of boiling, so he can price them at 5 cents versus the competitor down for 10 cents, and says that he went to high school with Nathan's nephew. Nathan is my wife's great-grandfather, and his nephew must be her great uncle. So what I learned today was that Hellers and handworkers were hanging out in Brooklyn in the 1930s, and that's my family and my wife's family. Can't make this shit up, I tell you. So that's where I'm at with the book right now. Very, very early in it. I'm probably 60 pages in, and it's 300 or something. But very curious to see where this takes Uncle Joe's life. Out of Brooklyn to the army, to catch 22, to success, to something happened, to good as gold, to 2 marriages, to Chinese food with my dad and Mel Brooks and Mario Puzo. Just who knows what's going to come, and I'm just very excited. And it makes me actually, last year when I did this thing for my 40th birthday, 40 things, one of the things on my list was family tree initially. And I sent stuff away to Ancestry to try to get that process started. They spit back to me that I'm basically a lame and white Caucasian, and that wasn't that interesting. So I realized that the actual family tree creation was a lot of effort, a lot of input. And last year I was doing 40 different things for my 40th birthday, so I just didn't. I switched that out and decided not to make that one of my 40. But it was something that interested me because I don't really even know that much about my mom's side, which I was much closer with growing up. So that's an undertaking that I may get involved with. But reading this yesterday, I'm like, oh wow, I want to know more here. So highly recommend family trees out there, and just learning more about your ancestors if you don't already. Maybe I'm in the minority here by not really knowing the history of both sides of the ledger, but something that I would like to get into. NBA playoffs. Round 2 is underway, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you can turn on any radio station, TV station, and hear way too many people talking about giving their opinions, mostly the same stuff repeated over and over again. So I'm going to run through it very quickly. I was very excited heading into these 4 matchups in the second round. I thought they all had their own unique appeal to them. Starting Golden State, New Orleans, I didn't think Steph was coming back this series, or I thought it was going to be after at least 4 games. So that kind of changes things here. Without Steph, I thought that the way that Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday and Rondo played in round 1, those 3 guys I think can go up against anyone, even the mighty Golden State Warriors. But now that Steph comes back and looks like he did in game 2, when Golden State wins the first 2 games up 2-0, it's going to be pretty tough sledding for the Pelicans here, and to be honest, tough sledding for everyone. I think if I were a betting man right now, I say Golden State pretty handily walks through these playoffs and wins the championship. I don't see much resistance out there in either conference for them if they are clicking on all cylinders. And not saying they're at their peak right now, but they're just better than everyone else. And if they're playing defense and Steph is healthy, they're going to be just almost an impossible out. Houston and Utah. After what I saw from the Jazz in round 1, I thought the Jazz had a really good chance to win this series and upset Houston. I think Houston is a flawed 1 seed. They might be more suited for the regular season than the postseason. They haven't really been there before deep into the playoffs. And I just think Utah was a really solid team. They have all the pieces and are very well coached, can play defense at the rim. Second half of the season were, I think 33-5 or something like that, like one of the better teams, which is an incredible job after losing their best player, Gordon Hayward, obviously replacing them with the rookie sensation Mitchell. Once Rubio went down, I thought that their chances were pretty much gone. However, they surprised me by winning Game 2 in Houston and evening the series at 1 game apiece, going back to Utah. Utah, a very tough place to play. So I think my initial gut reaction might be right, where Utah upsets Houston here. However, it's still tough without Rubio. It's still tough to keep pace with the Rockets. And the Rockets, when I say they're flawed, like if they're not hitting, if those threes are not dropping, like they were in Game 1, they weren't in Game 2, and they won 1 and lost 1. Like that's just how it works for them. And I don't know that you can go deep into the playoffs and be a serious contender if that's how you're, if you're based on those shots falling every single night, because they just don't. It just doesn't happen that way. Obviously, they have the best 2 players on the floor in Harden and Paul. So they should win this series, but it'll be a good one. It's one with a lot of intrigue, and I'm going to be watching that one pretty closely. Moving to the East, Philly and Boston. I think everyone thought, a week ago that Philly was the team that was going to come out of the East after what you saw from Cleveland in round 1. Before they finally pulled it out against the Pacers. And Philly has the most talent, and they were playing well, and they had a little swagger about them. But they go into Boston Game 1, and Boston just handles their business. And without Kyrie and Hayward and Marcus Smart now, questionable, Jaylen Brown hurt, for them to pull off a win against a team like that is impressive. It's just a tough place to play, and they're obviously incredibly well coached and disciplined. So this series is not going to be as easy as people thought, where Philly was an overwhelming favorite heading in, even without home court advantage. I just think maybe they're not ready, maybe they are. I think tonight is Game 2, and it's going to be an interesting one to tell how this series unfolds. I think Philly probably pulls it out, but I think they can't lose tonight, because I don't think they want to go back to Boston for a Game 7. And if you lose tonight and go down 2-0, you're essentially setting yourself up. You have to win 4 in a row, which is really hard at their young age against a good coach team, a well-coached team. So I think if they lose tonight, it's probably going at least it's Philly's not winning before Game 7, and winning Game 7 in that arena against that team, against that coach, that's going to be tough. Finally, Toronto and Cleveland. Game 2, by the way, starts at 6 p.m. tonight. I'm not all that familiar with time zones in Canada, but is Canada 7 hours ahead of us or something? I haven't been there in a while, but I don't understand a 6 p.m. start for a LeBron James playoff game. Get out of here with that. I'll be home to turn it on, but 6 to 7, I'm 6 to 7:30 even, I'm doing parent stuff. I got dinner with my boys. I got to give them baths. I got to put them to bed, read books. You know the whole deal. I can't be having LeBron on while I'm doing this stuff. This is ridiculous. God. Anyway, boy, did Toronto blow that Game 1. That was theirs for the taking. They were the better team, and just, what an awful, awful loss. And it's going to be tough to rebound, to come back from that one. Cleveland now, it seems like maybe has a little edge back to them. LeBron obviously is good at basketball. I think we know that. But he's just spectacular. We are just so lucky to be viewing at a time of this guy doing his thing on the court. It's just every single night close to triple-double numbers. And if he's not with this team, this semblance of talent or lack thereof that he has around them right now, he has to be spectacular every single night for them to have a shot to win. That's how it's absurd what this guy does on a night in, night out basis for so long. But I think if Toronto was up 1-0 right now, I would think, I think they're the better team. I think they find a way to pull this series out. The fact that they blew that game, I think Cleveland's probably going to advance. And right now, the way Cleveland is played, now that Tristan Thompson has come alive, and J.R. Smith hitting some shots, Kevin Love hitting some threes, and LeBron just so much better than anyone else in the East that he's going to face, you got to think Cleveland's going to come out, which, I think they get smoked in the finals, but that's where we're at right now. Who knows what happens with Game 2? Maybe the 6 p.m. start just messes up everything and Toronto takes it back and ties up the series, but who knows? The NFL draft happened last week. I wrote a post actually a couple of days before up on Medium. It's also on my Facebook page about how I thought Cleveland with the 1 and the 4 pick. There was a lot of talk which quarterback should they take? Should they maybe take 2 QBs, which is absurd. I said that they should take 0. And I knew that wasn't realistic. I knew they were going to take a QB first overall, but my thinking was that first-round QBs have a pretty poor hit rate. I didn't love any of these guys. There was no must-have guy. Everyone had a different ranking or order amongst the 4. So I thought the prudent move would be to take 2 quote-unquote locks in Bradley Chubb and Quentin Nelson, get some foundations on the line, defensive and offensive, and they have a great team. I think they have a lot of great – their skill position in Cleveland are super impressive now. Their defense is good, young defensive backfield, Myles Garrett, pair him with Chubb. I just think that could have been a different way to go, and I like Tyrod Taylor. I think Tyrod Taylor has a lot of untapped potential that hopefully with the weapons he has around them makes him come through. However, that didn't happen. They took Baker Mayfield 1, and they actually could have taken Chubb at 4, and they didn't. They passed for the Ohio State cornerback Denzel Ward at 4, which, whatever, I'm not going to be mad at them for that. But the QBs, so there were 4 QBs plus Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's kind of the wild card of the bunch. He went 32 to the Ravens. The 4 top guys who were all somebody's favorite, everyone said one of them should have went number 1. Everyone had a different order. All now have their landing spots. And which ones are set up for success? I think, historically, if we're going to look, I think it's fair to say that one of these 4 is going to be good, one's going to be okay, and 2 will be bad. So who's gonna slot in now that I know where they're at? So good. How do we define good as a quarterback? I would say the floor for good in this context is like Joe Flacco, Andy Dalton, maybe even Stafford, guys that you roll with, right? Like it will set your franchise back to get rid of them and try to make a QB change. They're like probably your starter for a handful of years at least. I would say that's the floor, and then obviously anything better than that is great. Then you move up to the next tier. So for me, out of these 4, the one who I think has the best path to that role is Josh Rosen in Arizona. West Coast kid, landing in the West Coast, super athletic, can make all the pro throws, and rumors that he is maybe a dick, but you hear conflicting stories about that stuff all the time. That doesn't really bother me. I just think he's set up for success the best out of these 4, and I think if 10 years we're like, who's the guy? Who's like the Matt Ryan, Cam Newton? I don't think anyone in this class is going to be, the Breeze, Rodgers, Brady class at all, Roethlisberger. But that the next tier down, I think it's Josh Rosen. Who's going to be okay? I think it's Sam Darnold. 2 years ago, probably would have been the number 1 pick. A lot of people liked him the best in this class. I just don't know. I think going to the Jets, not that much weaponry around him. Don't know if he plays year 1 with McCown and Bridgewater there, but I think he's probably a safe floor type of guy. When you think okay, you think Sam Bradford-esque. And bad, the 2 guys are going to be bad. I would say Baker Mayfield a bust, and the Browns keep on browning, even though he is really set up for success. So this is a tough call, but he should be okay. I just think he's going to be one of the ones that busts, and Josh Allen is the easy call for a bust. Going from Wyoming, playing no one, to Buffalo with no team around him, and the cold weather, it's just a recipe for disaster. I don't think any fan of any of these 4 teams can be like, yes, we got our guy. I don't think that exists in this foursome right here, and I think everyone has to be a little hesitant. I'm a Jet fan, or I was a Jet fan before fantasy football ruined my real football fandom, because now Jets are my favorite NFL franchise, but all of my fantasy franchises are the ones I actually root for on Sunday. So getting Darnold to my team, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, who's to say Teddy Bridgewater is not better, right? Like, if you tell me in 3 years or in 5 years, Teddy Bridgewater has been the starter and has been above average, and Sam Darnold is his backup, that scenario is well within the range of possibilities for me. So, being a fantasy football, extraordinaire, so a few fantasy questions after the draft, all involving running backs, since that's the only position that really matters year one in fantasy. Wide receivers rarely make a splash, and I don't think there are any that are going to be overly fantasy relevant this year, with DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley being your first-round guys. So 3 quick questions. Will Rashad Penny be handed the reins in Seattle? They picked him 27th overall, which is pretty high draft capital for a running back. So they have CJ Prosise there, who I like. Chris Carson was impressive last year. Mike Davis at the end of the year was impressive. So, like, they have bodies. They have Russell Wilson. Like, there's potential if someone was ever given that role to run with it. And you have to think logically that if they're going to pick a running back in the first round, which is usually a mistake or unnecessary, you can usually find talent in rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, or a free agent. Like, it's the most replaceable position there is. For them to go out and get Rashad Penny, who wasn't even widely considered the second best running back in the draft, even though that's where they took him, you have to think that's their plan. So if it is, on a team with Russell Wilson, there's some serious fantasy upside with Rashad Penny. Number 2, will Royce Freeman beat out Devontae Booker in Denver? We've seen the running back in Denver, whoever it may be, have fantasy value over the last handful of years. And I think that's still the case. I happen to have Devontae Booker in my Dynasty League, so I'm hoping that Royce Freeman is not going to take this job. But if he does, I think whoever, basically the point is, keep your eye on whoever wins that battle in camp, because I think there's some upside there for sure. And 3, is there any way that Saquon Barkley doesn't go in the first round of redraft leagues? I say absolutely not. I think, behind, there's the big 4 running backs at the top. I don't know if you like to go running back or receiver at the top of your draft, whatever. That's up to you. But there's the obvious, hierarchy of Gurley, Le'Veon, David Johnson, and Zeke. Behind them in the wide receiver position, I think you got Antonio Brown and DeAndre Hopkins making up their own tier. Beckham obviously is in there, but little unstable, unsure, injury, dickhead, whatever you want to call it. I think Barkley's right there. So I think right now, as it stands, he's probably a top 10 pick. I think the sexiness of him might bring him up to top 5 pick by the time draft rolls around. Those are the thoughts on the draft and what comes after the draft. One last topic to quickly go through is American Idol. Yes, I'm a big American Idol fan. Have been since the beginning, pretty much. I think Fantasia Barrino is the best voice I've ever heard. But that's another topic for another day. Where are we at in Idol right now? So obviously this is the reboot. It's been off the air for a few years, and now they come back, switch networks, new judges. Obviously Ryan Seacrest still in place. So first, the judges. I miss Simon Cowell, to be honest with you. I even miss Randy a little bit. Obviously, we all miss J-Lo every day. Every day I miss you, J-Lo. But these guys, Lionel Richie, I liked in the audition phase a lot. I thought, this is a cool dude. He knows his shit. And super impressive resume, which I wasn't fully aware of, the depth of Lionel Richie's catalog. Katy Perry, have not been a fan of most of what she's done thus far. And Luke Bryan had never heard of before this. And good old country boy act is kind of getting tired. But overall, they don't bring much to the table in terms of constructive criticism. Everyone, they like everyone. I just want to hear one of them say, you know, Caleb, that sucked. And we're not getting anything close to that. So there are 7 people left, 7 contestants left. They've really moved things along fast this year. They went from 14 to 10, and then 10 down to 7, which was maybe the season is shortened. And just the content overall, because there used to be at least 2 nights in a row, maybe 3 nights in a row when it was on Fox, right? Like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like performance, and then a whole show based around elimination. Where last week they just had one show with live voting via app or whatever, where everyone performed and then 3 people went home in that same night. Never happened before. So now they're down to 7. Cade, the rocker guy, who I think he's a novelty act. He's good, not great. I think people get tired of him fast. Caleb Lee Hutchinson, the good old country boy who seems to be extremely comfortable, confident, funny, self-deprecating, likable, and I think he wins this thing. I'm not saying he's the best, but I think he's the one who America is going to vote for. Katie Turner, the wild and wacky Katie, she's great. I think people will tire of her act. I won't. I don't really care about what they are off screen. I'm not voting. I never vote for any of this stuff, but I think she's a fantastic artist. I think she's got a great voice. Gabby Barrett seems like a potential country star. I'm not digging that music specifically, but she seems talented, yet potentially forgetful. Not forgetful, forgettable. I don't know what her memory capacity is. Journey, spelled Jurnee, which you gotta love. She's the best singer I've heard here in a while. She is incredibly effortless when she opens her mouth and sings. I'm not sure how far she's going to go. I wouldn't be surprised if she's out next week just because America is stupid. But her performances or song choices haven't been great thus far, but she is the best singer of the bunch, easily. Maddie Pope, or Pop, whatever you want to call her, she's great. She is an artist. I could see her winning, and I could see her being a thing in the music world. Not that I'm in touch with the music world at all, but she is super impressive and has her cute little ukulele, and she's got a cool voice. She's got a lot of good stuff going on there. And finally, Michael Woodard, who is one of the more unique characters I've ever seen on this show or anywhere. His whole personality as a singer and just as a person. I think Lionel Richie called him like a Martian last week, and I totally get it. You just kind of like want to stare and be like, what the hell are you about to do? Or what did you just do? Or his voice is incredible. He's just such a unique figure. I don't think he's the American Idol, and I don't see him having a career per se, but he has been a very interesting character to watch on this show. So that's my take on American Idol. And that's what I got for you today, guys. Just a little podpourri, as I said. I just wanted to get some random thoughts out there, things I've been thinking since I haven't spoken in a while on this platform. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Talkin' Ish. And if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. Twitter, cheller32. My website, chrisheller.me. Instagram, chrisheller.me as well. Or get my number. Figure it out. You're resourceful. Have a great day, guys. Thanks for being here.